Already fell.
She received her bachelor's and master's degrees from Baylor University and her PhD from Texas Tech University. She joined the Angelo State's History Department in 2012, where she teaches classes on U.S. history as well as ones on themes of the environment, science, and technology. Dr. Arthur's research focus is water development and water politics in the 19th and 20th centuries. Her talk today is entitled Curled Collars and Stained Shirts, A Brief History of Keeping Cool in Texas, and it is part of her miniature project, Dog Days and Catnaps, A History of Keeping Cool in Texas, which is currently under contract with Trinity University Press. So please join me in offering a warm welcome to Dr. Arthur.
Okay, hi. So first off, this is really awkward coming around from behind the screen. I feel like a game show host. It's not a great way to start. So firstly, can everyone hear me? Okay, I tend to project anyway, but I'm Mike. So just to begin with, thank you for being here. I know Allison already said that, but I kind of run this thing and I scheduled myself, and that feels a little weird, and you didn't have to show up. So just thank you for being here, getting your butts in the seat, or watching online, or whatever. So we don't have a clicker, so I'm going to have to say slide when I want to change the slide. So yes, apologies about that. So today I am talking about the heat, which is why it's not hot outside. We've had glorious temperatures the last day and a half, but in any case, my guess is all of you have been hot at some point in your life. I don't know if you glow or if you perspire or sweat or just shine. I don't know. But my guess is we've all endured those temperatures that are, what is it they say, hotter than a $2 pistol? I think that's the saying that people used to say. And if you've ever complained about the heat, you're in pretty good company. Because if you look through the historical archives and records, they never stopped complaining about the temperatures. They never stopped complaining about the heat, and they were just as vivid as we are today. And so before I get into the adaptations and start saying slide, I want to give you one pretty memorable excerpt that I found. It's from 1872. It's from the Galveston Daily News. And what you see as historic newspapers, they frequently reported on temperatures. This was a necessity in an age when you don't have cell phones giving you data anytime you want it. And so they reported on temperatures. They reported on climactic-induced issues like this stage is running late. This has melted and you can't go this way. That happened. And so the Galveston Daily News in 1872 is reporting on the heat, and it's a heat wave. And so they reported, quote, last Wednesday week, the mercury stood at 101.5 degrees in the shade at 5:30 p.m. 101.5, it's kind of awkward, 101.5 degrees in the shade at 5:30 p.m. And it was 98 after sundown. The heat was very sweltering and terrible on paper collars, starched shirts, and fat folks. Fat folks, yes, you heard right. Not politically correct, exactly, but still a good reminder, if a cheeky reminder, right, that our frustrations with the heat, our sort of visceral reactions to the heat, especially at certain times of the year, are nothing new. So let's get started. If you look at this picture up here, this is London. It's not even Texas. That's such a cop-out. But I just loved this image. And short of the uniform change, you could have found any number of images of lower resolution that showed the exact same thing. It's all about practicality. So slide, please. We're going to go ahead and get started. So what I'm going to do today is focus not on the heat, We all know the heat. We saw the meme with the melted windmills earlier this summer. They didn't actually melt with the heat, but we saw the memes. And so what I want to do instead is focus on the different strategies that people have used to beat the heat and the way those strategies have changed over time, or more accurately, not changed as much as you might think. And so for those of you who are very visual people, or perhaps you're here for extra credit and not because you're interested, that's fine too. Perhaps you need to write a reflection. Here's a good line for you, okay? My purpose here today is, as I said, to talk about the different strategies that Texans have used to beat the heat and how those strategies have changed or not. So I'm basically repeating it. It's a fun talk. There's a lot of cool things we're going to talk about, but there's really two important things I want you to take away that are not listed up here. Or maybe they are. Actually, slide. I'm so sorry. Slide, please, Dr. Huntley. Or maybe, yes. I forgot I included this slide for your benefit. So there are two key points that I really want you to take away from this, because there's a lot we could cover. This is a whole book, right? I can't cover everything. Two key things I want you to take away. Firstly, pre-industrial or non-mechanical, you could say, adaptations to the heat, they persisted well after the introduction of modern day cooling technologies. People don't stop fanning themselves. They don't stop opening windows. They don't stop chilling their underwear just because you have centralized air conditioning. And don't laugh, you all know people that have chilled their underwear and fanned themselves and opened their windows. This is a story of change, but just as much so it's a story of continuity, in the way that sometimes people have chosen to continue fanning themselves. And sometimes, this sort of bleeds into the next point, sometimes people haven't had a choice because of racial issues, because of class issues, because of access issues. And so that brings me to the next point. That cooling technologies that were introduced, swamp coolers, for example, plug-in units, single room units, centralized units, they often became indicators of social status. And what I mean by that is that this is a fun story, but we learn some important things. It teaches us about racial hierarchies, about class hierarchies, about social status. Because, as I sort of already said, some individuals, some families, they don't have the social capital, they don't have the economic capital. Sometimes they literally don't have legal access to areas that might be used for cooling off, like an urban park. Some people can't just get away to the seashore for 2 months. Some people can't change their own work schedule to avoid the heat of the day. Some people can't haul in ice for their personal use, and all of these are common strategies. So we're going to get back to these a little bit, but only a little bit. So what I want to do next, slide please, thank you. I'll probably sing that a couple times, I'm sorry, it's what I do. Is we're going to start by looking at architectural adaptations. We're going to start by looking at architectural adaptations, which is, oh, I forgot. Dude, you should have reminded me. Sorry, that was very informal. Thank you, Dr. Huntley, for reminding me. I inserted this. You can see up here, I inserted this little cutout from this advertisement. If this was more to my side, I would have remembered. I'm sorry. But you can see here, right, who is being advertised to, who is being targeted, who the ideal audience is. And this is not just this one advertisement that is targeting sort of middle-class white families. You see that universally almost, ubiquitously. And as we're going to see towards the end of this lecture, not coincidentally, it is middle-class white families that are largely going to drive the adoption of air conditioning, while the wealthy families look back and go, oh, I don't know, I can still afford to do other things. And while rural families, minority families, poorer families, sometimes groups that intersect those categories, are going to look back and go, oh, I can't do that. So now another slide, please. I'm so sorry that you have to get up. So now, yes, now we are going to look, and this is live streamed, it's here in perpetuity, so whatever. Now we're going to look at architectural adaptations to the heat. And the reason I want to start there is, one, it's super cool. and it's just something that fascinates me. But to Texans then as now, we spend a lot of our time at our house. Even if we also spend a lot of our time at school or at our workplace, the average person spends about a third of their life in their home. And so it makes sense that they would be intentional there about doing things to increase their comfort. And so speaking of intentionality, historically, Texans were very, very, very intentional about building homes that were adapted to climatic conditions. It's not so much what we do today. Today we kind of just go, whatever, I'm going to conquer this through my AC. That's not really how it worked before the mid-1900s. Instead, Texans were intentional about building homes that encouraged ventilation, the movement of air, and discouraged the buildup of heat, because that was just practically necessary. As I said, this is the case until the mid-20th century. We're going to get back to that later when we discuss why things change. But for now, let's just say that, as it says up here, if you study historic homes, you actually see a pattern begin to emerge, a geography, you might say, a spatiality in architectural styles. Put simply, as it says up here, Texans are going to find pretty quickly regionally specific and regionally appropriate ways to beat the heat. Soddies, dugouts, adobe earthen homes, dog trots. We're going to talk briefly about all of these. It makes sense because of the local resources available for use. It makes sense because of the local climatic conditions, and it makes sense because these are all effective ways to cool the home. And so this is pretty basic, but it's something that I've been documenting as I've looked at historic homes. I went down the rabbit hole. I don't know if any of you have ever done big research projects where you hit that point where you should stop with your sources, and if you're smart, you do, and if you're like me, you don't. I now have a list of 1,200 historic homes that I am documenting on a spreadsheet. I mean, way rabbit hole. I've gone way too far. But I'm committed to moving forward with this because I'm documenting the adaptations that were built into these homes. I'm documenting the styles of the home, the year of construction, the location. And what I'm seeing is that everything I'm about to say to you, they're not infallible rules. Sometimes people just want to build their home in whatever style they want, wherever they are. And they're just not going to be all that concerned about local conditions. So there will be exceptions, but these rules, these patterns are going to hold pretty true. And so let's look at a few of them, if you don't mind, Dr. Huntley. Thank you. We're going to start by looking at adobe homes in the Trans-Pecos and the Texas-Mexico borderlands. This is a small enough group. I can interact a little bit. Raise your hand if you've ever seen an adobe home. Raise your hand if you've ever seen a stucco home. Raise your hand if you know the difference. Yes, there is a distinct difference. Stucco refers only to the plastering process you're putting on the exterior. So don't assume you've seen adobe homes. You may not have. As we're going to mention, many adobe homes have been destroyed across the state intentionally. It was sort of a post-war thing to clear room to build up new houses. So you've probably seen stucco. But adobe homes, they're still around, and they were especially common in the Trans-Pecos and in the Texas-Mexico borderlands. Adobe, the reason it's so common is, one, it makes use of raw materials in these sort of semi-arid regions that are readily available. You got clay, you got straw, you got grass, maybe a little bit of water. You can change up the ingredients a little bit, but that's basically it. Those are the basic ingredients to adobe bricks, and then you sit them out in the sun and let them bake. It also worked in the Trans-Pecos, in the Texas-Mexico borderlands, because adobe is not great if it rains, which is why you don't see it too many regions outside of that, although I did find an adobe home in Brenham, Texas. Do you know where Brenham, Texas is? It is down near Houston, Hempstead. It's by College Station. I found an adobe home in Brenham. I was shocked. So you will find Exceptions, but the problem with locating adobe, and I'm going to go environmental historian on you here, is that clay has a high shrink swell capacity. And so what that means is that if it rains a lot, say in coastal East Texas, clay can shrink. No, it's going to do the opposite. I was testing you. It can swell. If it rains a lot, if it absorbs a lot of water, the adobe can swell. If it's really, really dry after that, it can shrink, and you don't want your walls pulsing and breathing in that way. So adobe works for climactic reasons, but as I've put up here, it works also because adobe has a high thermal capacity and a low thermal diffusivity. Those are big words, okay? Let me tell you briefly what they mean. All that means is that it takes a lot of heat for adobe bricks to transmit heat into the interior. It takes a lot of heat for the temperature of adobe itself to increase. And so it takes a long time and a lot of temperature for the inside of an adobe home to increase. And the thicker the adobe walls, the longer it's going to take. That's where you get this low thermal diffusivity. It's low because it takes a long time for it to diffuse. And high thermal capacity. It has a high capacity to store heat. Does that kind of make sense? Just lie. It doesn't matter. Okay, so adobe. You're going to see that as a great adaptation. Adobe homes are still used in areas today. They're used around the world, actually, because they're low cost. They make use of available resources, and they're genuinely cool on the inside relative to exterior temperatures. I say up here that there's going to be racial associations, sometimes economic ones too. I already said that, right? Especially in the borderlands and areas like El Paso. It's hard to find historic homes that predate, say, 30s, 40s, 50s because they've been raised. So if the next slide, if we can, thank you. Let's hop over to East and Central Texas, and it's totally different. Any of you from East or Central Texas in the house? I grew up in Houston. I hated it. No shade against H-Town. I couldn't wait to get out, though, because it was hot and humid, and that was not my jam. And so now I'm here where it rains once every 5 months. And so if you look at East and Central Texas, you are rarely going to find an adobe home. It is just not suitable. Also, you have trees in East and Central Texas, which is something you don't have as frequently in the Trans-Pecos, in the borderlands. You might as well take advantage. And so you know this if you went to school and learned about Stephen F. Austin, right? In these areas, you are going to see wood-framed homes and log cabins. What you may not have learned about in 4th grade social studies is that oftentimes these log cabins and these wood-framed homes, they took the form of the East Texas construction style. It's also known as the dog trot, or the double pin, or the saddlebag, or the central breezeway, or just the central breeze, if you want to be super cool. So this East Texas home, it makes use of local resources, right? Trees. You got lots of trees. But you remember that thermal conductivity, diffusivity, capacity thing I said didn't matter? It matters a little bit. Because wooden boards and wooden logs, they don't keep out the heat. They conduct it really, really well. And so the interior of these wooden homes got really, really hot in a way that adobe homes didn't. How you get around that? Well, you build windows. But what else do you do? What do you see in the middle there? Yeah, looking past that even. What can you see between the two windows in that little hole? I'm giving it away. It's a hole. It's a central passageway. It is a breezeway where your dogs could sit on a hot day and cool off, or where you could sit on a hot day. The doors, they faced into that passageway so that you could open the doors and allow the breeze through. The same way that over in Academic, right, we've got those breezeways connecting the two sides. During the storm yesterday, it was beautiful. There was this nice breeze funneled through, even though you didn't have that same breeze elsewhere. And so it's similar here. These dog trot homes were a great adaptation to the heat, even if they included no other passive measures, and they did, and we'll get there soon enough, okay? I'm not going to bore you too much. If you will move the next slide. Sorry, I don't know how to ask that. Thank you so much, Dr. Huntley. In addition to these East Texas homes, the reason it's called that is because like everyone threw them up in East Texas. Guys, Dwight D. Eisenhower was born in a dog trot home, okay? What usually happened if you wanted to glam it up is you just put a door at the passageway. So there are a lot of homes, even in San Angelo, because the dog trots spread everywhere, but definitely in East and Central Texas where you can't tell, but they are actually central passageway homes that have just been glammed up a little bit with the addition of a front and back door. But let's look now at the upper Gulf Coast and ironically the inner cities. Ironically, the inner cities as well. You are going to see the Nolans or the New Orleans style home, the shotgun home, because this home was so ubiquitous in New Orleans. Now, famously, with these shotgun homes, and if you look at this picture, this is a shotgun type of house occupied by a workman. That's in Corpus Christi, so that's in a coastal city, but this is also in a lower income part of the city, and that's why you see these in inner cities. They were very cheap to throw up, they were cheap to construct, and you could cool them off without a lot of mechanical interventions. So even today, you go to inner city Houston, and you will still see a lot of inner city or poor or ethnic minority neighborhoods that are heavily shotgun homes. Now they're called shotgun homes because the way they're built, they're usually one room wide, sometimes two, but they're no more than 1 to 2 rooms wide and they're several rooms deep. And then the idea is if you line up the doors and you open them, you can fire a shotgun is not a word, a shotgun. You can laugh at me, it's okay. You can fire a shotgun through the home and it won't hit anything. That's why they're called shotgun homes in theory. That's one urban legend. But there is a practical consequence to lining it up that way. Why do you think it would be beneficial? Maybe I should keep that rhetorical. This is a lecture. No, go ahead. Yeah, you're basically just creating a central passage. That's exactly right. It does the exact same thing. And especially if you are along the coastline, you got a lot of breezes to catch. And so you see these all over, especially the upper Gulf Coast because of when it's settled and because of who is settling it and where they are coming from. Remember, New Orleans, right? Southern migrants, they bring the dog trot and the shotgun home with them. So again, you see a great adaptation. And then finally, if you could move forward one more. This is the longest part of the lecture, I promise. Because I got to speed up, otherwise I won't finish. The last one I want to draw your attention to, you've probably seen pictures of these, right? In 1301 and 1302 textbooks, or just histories of the West if you're into that. And these are the soddies, or the sod homes, right? And the dugouts. I'm lumping them together. They're technically two different things, right? Sod homes are built out of sod, usually. You can see that here, right? You can see, especially up in that top picture, how it's layers of sod literally stacked on top of each other. Dugouts are dug out of the ground. Sometimes you have soddies that are dug into the ground, so they're like soddy dugouts. But we're going to collapse these, smush them together into a single little category because they're generally located in the same area, Panhandle, North Central Plains, and they build off of the same idea. In fact, it's the same idea as we've already seen with Adobe, that earthen materials are great for cooling the interior of homes because of the way they conduct heat, or don't conduct heat very readily. And again, you don't got a lot of trees. We know that. We're in San Angelo. If you've been to somewhere like, say, Lubbock, you know you pass like 2 trees, right? The whole 3 hours up to Lubbock, you pass like 2 trees, and that's it. There's just not a lot of trees here. So this is also just very reasonable, given the dearth of vegetation, tall vegetation regionally. So if you don't mind, in addition to all of this, in addition to considering the architectural styles, you're also going to see Texans incorporate passive cooling measures. You're also going to see that people incorporated passive cooling measures. That sounds super fancy, but we still do these things today. You can see it represented here. This particular home is in Galveston. It's available to tour. It's a historic site. And one of the most universal adaptations is the most obvious. It just, you build windows and then you open them. But that's actually a very cost-effective and just very effective way to cool your home. Why? Because if you've ever been inside a stuffy room, right now this is feeling a little stuffy because I don't like talking in front of people, despite the fact that I'm a teacher. So I'm feeling stuffy. I would like some ventilation. Anyway, but what you see is when you open windows, that allows for ventilation. It allows for the circulation of air. And if you look at this house, what do you see? I've given it away, but there's windows. You can only see two sides. Let's use our deductive reasoning. It's probably on what? Yeah, louder in the back. It's probably on all four sides, and it is, spoiler, right? And so when you put windows on all four sides, not only can you get ventilation, you can get cross ventilation. So no matter which way the wind is blowing, you might be able to get some ventilation, and you might get them hitting it just the right way that it really cools off the interior of the home. In addition to just, say, having windows, you are also going to see people elevating the ceilings in their home. The average ceiling today in an American home is anywhere from 8 to 10 feet. And 10 feet is considered a little high. Usually you have to pay extra for that. In these historic homes, I keep stumbling on examples where the ceilings are 10 feet, 11 feet, 12 feet, 14 feet, and that's the norm. They have extra tall ceilings. Why? Because heat does what? It rises. That seems like basic science, like, I don't know, junior high, elementary, I don't want to like shade science students, but like basic science here. Heat rises. You account for that. I mean, maybe not if you're upstairs, right? But on the downstairs, you account for that by elevating your ceilings. You also see, this is represented here, people are going to just elevate the whole house. Now, this is Galveston. What's the primary reason why they've elevated their house? Floods, because they're smart, right? There are other reasons why people are going to elevate their homes. I am not naive enough nor arrogant enough to say that this is only about cooling. But it is also about cooling. Because when you elevate a home like this, especially, pier and beam style, we have some of that here in San Angelo. If you elevate it like this and see how it has the lattice work, it's not blocked off. So what does that do? Some of you are doing the hand motions. I think this means breeze. Hula or breeze? Yes, it allows for breezes circulating beneath the home, which again can help introduce cooling breezes. It can just artificially decrease the temperature of the air below it and thus decrease the temperature inside the home. In addition, can you see where it says transom windows? It's the little windows right above the door and to the side. This looks purely decorative. It's not. You have transom windows built frequently just at the front. So the use is somewhat minimized here, but you see it all the time on historic homes. You can actually open those. It was a way, if you didn't have a central passage, or say you don't want to open your front door, it is a way for you to open up these windows, or maybe you open up with your front door to increase the space that you're ventilating. And you see transom windows in all sorts of homes. You don't usually see them in adobe homes. You don't usually see them in soddies and dugouts. But other than earthen homes, you see a lot of these passive measures all over the place. The fancy way to say that, people in the room here with reflection papers to do, the fancy way to say that is it transcends racial, class, and social boundaries. You're welcome. People from all different groups. Not everyone will latch on to every adaptation, but you see examples of people from different ethnic, cultural, racial, and economic groups doing things like building in transom windows or opening up windows or elevating their homes. In addition to that, you can just increase the thickness of your wall. If you're building your house out of brick, you put an extra layer of brick. If you're building it out of stone, you put extra layers of stone. If you're building it out of concrete, that's going to start happening. That's actually one reason why adobe homes are raised in El Paso. They get a concrete factory. you put extra layers of concrete. It's not unusual to find walls that are 18 to 24 inches thick, which I see that and I'm like, what are you hiding a body back there? Because that feels really, really big. My walls are like this big, but my house also isn't insulated well because it was not built in an era when we were doing these things. And so the thicker the wall in general, the more it is going to push back against the radiant heat and stop the interior of your house from getting super duper hot. They're also going to, and we know this, they're going to build porches and galleries, which that's my dream. I just want a wraparound porch, not even for keeping cool, just for being outside. But they are going to build wraparound porches, wraparound galleries. And there's multiple purposes to this. I'm not going to ask you to go back, so I have a clicker. But if I had a clicker, I would go back to the second slide where you saw those dudes, those men, chilling with their hats on the storefront under the porch. It's just a shady place to stay, which means it is cooling in the sense that you can sit in the shade. Depending on how you arrange it, like north, south, east, west, and depending on where the breezes come, you can kind of have your porch acting like a little breezeway too. But there's another reason why porches are great. They cool the air before it gets in your house. If you are opening up your windows and you have awnings later on, or porches, it will serve I was going to say secondary, I guess tertiary function here, in that it will cool the air before it even gets in your house. So if you also have extra thick walls, and if you also have high ceilings, you are doing multiple things to help cool your home. Oh, one final thing you're going to see about the homes before we move on to the people, which is probably what you're here for. It's less interesting. I don't have as many good pictures. But anyway, the last thing you're going to see here is the interior of the home matters as well. It was actually very, very common for people to swap out their draperies and even to swap out their floor mats and their floor coverings. Now, to me, that sounds like work. It's not something I do, but you know what? I got carpet. You don't switch out your carpet. I don't switch out my drapes. But 100 years ago, even 50 years ago, it was actually very, very common for people to switch out their draperies and their floor coverings seasonally. And so what they would do is when winter ended, if you were upper or like upper middle class, you might have velvet drapes. You do not want velvet drapes in summer. So what do? You change it out for linen or lace if you're very Gucci. Just got saying it like it is. If you cannot afford velvet and lace, you're probably putting up mosquito netting. But you know what? It serves the same purpose. It allows you to open your windows without letting all the bugs in, because no one has time for mosquitoes. And so you're going to see sometimes they even change out the coverings on their sofas, which is just an extra level of attention. Most people just end up covering them, right? You're going to cover it with a light linen, cover it with a light silk, cover it with a light lace. But some people literally change out the coverings on their sofas. Again, I think the way they thought of it is they want fabrics that absorb less heat. That's not really how it was working. But that's what it felt like to them. And it certainly did help deflect the radiant heat. It helped make it feel comfortable, and that's the whole point of keeping cool. So I lied. There's one last thing I'm going to say about houses, but y'all are here. You'll put up with it. So in addition to looking at architecture on a macro scale and looking at passive measures, there's one last kind of sciencey thing I want to mention, and that's microclimates. That is microclimates. You are also going to see that, again, this is not something we do today. We're going to talk about the Levitt towns and like cookie cutter construction. But back in the day, people built their homes with local, and I mean local, like this little square inch of land, localized conditions in mind. And so what I mean by that is the directionality of your house mattered. Whether the front of your house is facing north or south or east or west, that radically impacts how much radiant heat you absorb during the day. That's not something we really think about in most modern day residential construction. Or we think about it and we're like, well, local ordinances don't care. I have to do this. So thinking about the directionality of your home is something that most Texans were very, very intentional about until the mid-1900s. Also, location, location, location. if you have a hill, we don't have too many in Texas, but there's areas where you have hills, right? And placing your house on one side of the hill might mean lots of sun. Placing it on the other side of the hill might mean far less sun in the afternoon when it's super duper hot. So you're going to see there's letters where they're like, we put it on the southeast side of the hill because that was where the sun was less grabbing during the day. Also, planting it on top of a bluff. Most of us probably have been through the hill country, right? If you locate it on a bluff, if you site your home along a riparian corridor, which is like rivers, right? A little river with some trees nearby. Rivers facilitate breezes as well in many cases. They can facilitate evaporative cooling. And so you're going to see people taking advantage of microclimates. I don't want to go sometimes even 10 yards that way because there's a difference in the climate, and you don't think climate works like that. It really shouldn't be different. I'm kind of looking at Dr. Brewood to make sure he's not like saying no to me rapidly, and he's not, so I'm good. But like climate's not supposed to work like that. At least we don't think so. It's not supposed to work where like 10 yards makes a difference, but sometimes it does actually work that way. So now let's move on to more personalized, individualized adaptations to the heat, okay? The way in which people outside of their homes, or sometimes inside their homes, are going to moderate their individual exposure. Could you please change it again, Dr. Huntley? I gave you a nice long break. I'm so sorry. I'll make cookies for you. Okay, so if you're talking about individual behaviors, there are lots of things that you can do to keep cool. Now, we're going to start with this idea. I've got this nice quote up here. No man, unless he is some poor, unfortunate creature, and there are lots of poor, unfortunate creatures, right, that are going to fall in this category. But whatever. No man, unless he is some poor, unfortunate creature tied downtown, nice euphemism there, by business needs suffer from the heat. What does that mean? It means if you've got the right resources, the right connections, the right money, and maybe the right job if you have a job, you can moderate the heat by just escaping it. It was not uncommon for wealthy Texans in the 19th century into the 20th century to have multiple homes. They had a winter home and they had a summer home. And I don't mean like they summered in Maine and they wintered in Acapulco. I mean like they summered in Cameron Park in Waco, which is just in Waco, but at the top of the bluffs by the Bosque River. And then in the winter, they went back down. I mean, they're not even going that far. They're staying in the same city, but they have summer and winter homes. And then sometimes it's longer, right? This lovely image that's a little dark, this is from a resort in Galveston, Texas. I love it because you can see the number of people here gathering to swim, to visit the resort. Also, can you see the lines they're holding on to? They clearly don't trust the currents, which is a smart thing. So you're going to see weeks-long, months-long visits to resorts, to mineral springs, to hotels. Wealthy individuals, when they can, they moderate the heat by just leaving it. But you're also going to see what you might say less wealthy families. They're going to seek out sylvan shades, as one newspaper put it, in local parks. Now, I said at the beginning, not everyone has access to local parks. Like up until the 1960s, you still got some pretty legit Jim Crow segregation laws on the books. Not everyone can access local parks for shade. Even after Jim Crow laws are taken off the books, the sad reality is that sometimes you still have social segregation that is going to keep these areas off limits, okay? So not everyone can access these places, but if you have the access, you also have places like natatoriums, watering holes, public swimming pools, and sometimes just the river, right? Where you can go escape more temporarily to cool off. Could you go to the next one? I'm so sorry. Don't even sit down for a second. So sorry. Yeah, so here you have, this is in Cameron Park. Judging by their dress, they're probably like upper middle class to upper class. You can see they're wearing their whites. That is another adaptation. You don't want to wear your heavy fabrics. You want to switch to your lighter fabrics. Now, I only have like the sort of prototypical Victorian whites in here. Sometimes you're going to see different adaptations in dress among different ethnic and cultural groups, but generally it's always going to mimic a shift to lighter patterns and a shift in lighter colors if you can afford to do so. Sometimes you only got 2 dresses, and that just is what it is, and you have to wear what you wear. And if you go to the next one, thank you, Dr. Huntley. Here's a picture of the natatorium. Also in Waco, because Waco was the first archive to open back up in the midst of the pandemic. That's why so many of my pictures are from there. So if you could go to the next one, you don't have to do the updates right now. It's not my computer, but yeah, you can click that down. Other things you're going to see is just fanning yourselves. My guess is most of you have been to an art museum, and many art museums have fans, right? Somewhere in their collection. Sometimes they're the painted fans, sometimes they're the feather fans. Sometimes fans are primarily decorative, but really most women at this time are going to carry fans. This is true in the mid-19th century in Texas. It is true, again, in many regions. I'm grossly simplifying, but you see it across regions, you see it across economic and racial groups. The makeup of the fan differs. Absolutely. The quality of the fan differs. Sometimes the importance of the fan, it might be your only way of keeping cool. But you are going to see fans used quite widely. This picture down here is Jane Long, mother of Texas. If you've taken Texas history as Dr. Powers, for example, I don't know if he talks about her, but Jane Long, you can see she has a fan. This picture is from 1850. I've juxtaposed it with this ice picture, which is from 1913. And you still have people fanning themselves in 1913. But I love this photo because it's a great reminder that people also just start using ice, which is something we take for granted today. Like, we got ice machines. I'm weird because I don't like ice in my drinks. Most of us are just real. I know some of you are like, what? I don't like hot drinks, like hot water. I just don't like ice cold water. I'm reacting against this era. Anyway, ice becomes really, really common in the 1870s. You have the first artificial ice makers. Believe it or not, people don't trust artificial ice. It is seen as unnatural. There's even a preacher in Florida. Sorry, it's not Texas, but he's in Florida. He goes on a holy rant. But there's also a preacher in Florida who supports ice. So I don't know. But you may not know this. We don't have a lot of like frozen lakes here in Texas where we can go get our natural ice. And so you are going to see 1879 is when you have one of the earliest patents. But in the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, you begin to see these ice machines that are fabricated, patented, put in place. By 1900, pretty much every major city in Texas has at least one ice factory, and many have multiple. They start bringing ices into their homes to have ice boxes. Get it? Refrigerators, ice in a box. That's literally what it was. Ice in a box. They start bringing it in for their drinks. They start bringing it in also for some of the first mechanical interventions. So now we are going to move there because we are running out of time. But you know what? That's okay. My focus is not really, I hope this isn't disappointing. My focus is, it's nothing you could do anyway, but my focus is not so much to focus on the air conditioning technology itself. There's actually books on that part of it. But again, to look at the other technologies, the non-mechanical technologies. So maybe adaptations is the word I should be using here, not technologies. Could you please move forward? Thank you so much. Before we move on, though, I've got to show you this because I love it. This is a rocking chair fan. It was patented in 1847. So this is pre-Civil War era. That's right. A rocking chair fan. It never catches on. It never really catches on because people felt weirded out by the fact that it was the movement of the rocking chair that engaged various pulleys and levers that made the fan move, and that just weirded people out. But it was a nice imaginative little gizmo, and it speaks to some of the very imaginative ways that people are trying to keep cool. I saw this, I was like, I've got to make this work. It is just beautiful. Now though, Dr. Huntley, you can move on. So, as it says, in the late 1800s, Texans, they begin turning to technological solutions far more frequently because they now have technological solutions they can choose from. Remember the whole second industrial revolution thing in the last decades of the 1800s? It's not just about canned beer and incandescent light bulbs. Although electricity and the advent of electricity does go a long way and probably explains why you are going to have so many mechanical solutions. You are going to electrify things like that little rocking chair fan. You have the first electric-powered fan in 1882. You have the first electric-powered ceiling fans shortly thereafter. By the way, they were dangerous and people died. The first electric fan was literally just blades, and there was no cage. The cage was optional, and all the wires were live. You could literally just touch the back where they went to the blades and just kill yourself 5 different ways. So there's a slow adoption here, but you got the first electric fans. You got the first electric ceiling fans. Once you have that, you're going to have something called ice cooling, which is when you take a fan and put it behind a chunk of ice, and you let the ice melt a little bit, and it blows. Evaporative cooling is a natural process. It blows the cool air towards you. James A. Garfield, right, dying of an assassin's bullet, that's what they do for him. It's just not powered yet by the same things that these electric fans are powered by. They use Navy technology and blowers to do the same thing. You're going to see window units and plug-in units, mechanical refrigeration emerging shortly thereafter. And the thing I want you to understand about these technologies I'm not describing in any detail is that they are not adapted quickly. That was one of the 2 points, right? They are not adapted quickly. Part of that is because people living in their homes are not the target. The early target for fans are businesses. The first target for electric fans and ceiling fans. The first target for mechanical refrigeration units, businesses. Centralized air conditioning and plug-in units, businesses. It will be the 1920s before electric fans are actually adopted broadly into homes. 1920s, the whole consumerism thing. It's also the 1920s when you see ceiling fans catching up as well. My guess is the technology is safer by that point as well. But what's really going on is that when these technologies initially emerged, they're expensive. And so even wealthy Texans don't want to go in on that when they have other adaptations that work. But business owners, if you want to make sure your fabrics aren't getting messed up, the production of your fabrics, that can be heat sensitive, that can be humidity sensitive, and early cooling was just as much about humidity as heat. It makes sense that they would be the first to adopt fans, refrigeration, and electric fans. Oscillating fans are going to come later. First, you just have to have the fan. So it's going to be a while before you see these things even adopted into the homes. It's going to be the businesses, and it's going to be, can you go to the next one, please? Thank you so much. It's also going to be theaters, Nickelodeons, hotels, trains, places of consumption and leisure, because you're just not going to go to a Nickelodeon or a theater as readily if it's super hot and super smelly. It just kind of destroys the ambiance. If you go in and it's BO. If you go in and you're like, it's 110 degrees. Now there's some fits and starts here as they're figuring out the technology. When they first start using, I'm gonna laugh here. When they first start using mechanical refrigeration, it works so well that the temperature drops to like 50. And people are like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. And they all complain about the pneumonia they're catching at the Nickelodeon. And so the business owners are like, it's just this whole hullabaloo. It's not funny to them, but it's funny in hindsight. There's going to be some real struggles because you can't control it. You're just cooling it and you're trying to sort of adjust things as you go on. But it makes sense, right, that it's going to be the theaters, the trains, the hotels, the department stores, the places of leisure and consumption. So the last thing I have time to talk about, because I'm now at 50 minutes, and I told myself 45 because we got like pets to get home to, as well as actual babies. Last thing I want to mention is, why do you see eventually, and we're jumping forward here a little bit, you can buy the book in a couple of years, because it's not done and it's supposed to be. Why? COVID, I hope my editor's not watching. It'll be done real soon. So why do you see centralized air conditioning? The processes are there. It takes a while to get from plug-in to mechanical all the way to centralized air conditioning as we now know it and love it today. It goes out and we're like, oh, I'm dying. I can't do anything. And we're like, we probably could. Why is it that you see this adopted? It's because of that post-war period of affluence. It is because of that post-war period of social anxiety when people are looking for conformity and they are looking for status and meaning, and when developers are looking for a way to keep the economy going and to sell stuff. I don't mean to sound cynical, but that's kind of what happens. Air conditioning, it's been a luxury to this point. The wealthy aren't adopting it because if you already own a big fancy home, you do not want to pay to retrofit it with this technology. And if you're building a new home, you're just going to pay the landscapers and the architects and developers to, do the tried and true methods. You don't really see too many wealthy Americans. They're there, okay? I'm not saying they're not. But it's not wealthy Americans in mass who are adopting this. It's not poor Americans either, or rural Americans. My grandma left me a diary, one of those like little books with her picture on the front. It's like a little girl holding her grandma's hand. It's the story of her life. And I cherish it now because my grandma's gone. But I'll never forget, she wrote in the front a picture of her cute little girl on a farm. And she's like, I didn't know, this is how she spoke, "Kenna girl, I didn't know to miss the air conditioning because we never had it and we did just fine." And she was right. It's not rural families. It's not poor families. It's not many minority families. Although, again, there's exceptions. They can't afford it. It is middle-class Americans moving to the suburbs. Can you move to the Levittown one, please? Yeah. It is middle-class white families who are looking for status, who are looking to climb the ladder, who are looking for that culture of conformity, Cold War scares, I don't want to stick out, I'm American, who have a little bit of extra money and want to spend it, and who are building their new homes. And guess what? The developers are like, your new home is going to come with AC. And middle-class Americans are like, okay. It is really those developers who rebrand this as a necessity. And you know what? It kind of is at this point because we no longer orient our homes. And we put in big glass sliding doors, and I have big glass sliding doors in my sunroom, and those things, they create a convection oven. I go in my sunroom, and I'm like melting. And I go out there, my puppy's like, nope. He turns it right back inside. And they do the balloon walls that are like 2 inches of insulation, and that's it. And you look here, you can't orient your home anywhere to catch a breeze. Where are you going to get a breeze there? And in this context, air conditioning really kind of does become a necessity. And it is really this middle-class white group that adopts it first in large numbers. Not all. There's exceptions. You got some minority families who are here doing this thing. You got some rural families doing this thing. You got some wealthy families doing this thing. And even middle-class white families adapting air conditioning are still looking for ways to save some money, because if you've ever turned on your air conditioning, you know it's not cheap. And they're still going to fan themselves, and they're going to chill their underwear, and I know you do too sometimes. I'm sorry, it's a little personal. So this is air conditioning and heating. I got to stop. But there is a lot more I could say. Like I said, this is a whole book, and I haven't even touched the tip of the iceberg. But thank you for being here. Like I said, I scheduled myself, and there was just nothing you could do about that, but you didn't have to show up. And we do have time. We really need to applaud, because that's just not, no, don't. Turn it. I mean, remember, I did not call out anyone individually, but I did, and I know who you are, and I remember that in class. But we do have time for some questions. I don't remember the date. I think it's November 9th. Bad person. It's November the 9th. It's this, I was going to say lovely, but I don't want to be weird. This amazing professor back here, Dr. Lynch. She's going to be speaking on From Beyond the Grave. Wills and legal education. We're going to be sending out the links, making the flyers. My partner on my committee, also Dr. Powers. 9th. Yes, thank you for that. Also, Dr. Powers, y'all been helping me. And thank you for coming. Thanks to the committee. And Dr. Huntley gave a great talk last month. Dr. Lynch is going to be amazing. We have more next semester. Dr. Hooten's going to be talking civil rights, part of Black History Month. We have a good lineup. And we can skip questions if you want. Do you have questions? We can skip them. I'm so torn.
I've also noticed it's not so much a question, but also an observation. One that was, you said 14 feet high for that one with the porch in front. It was also like a great benefit to be elevated, because you remember from like Houston,
Absolutely. And again, my master's degree is in science, so just forgive this, okay? I came to history through law school, through environmental science, so I'm weird, okay? But what you may not know, the science in me has to say this, is that the more concrete you build, the hotter it gets. When you pave over those natural grassways and when you increase the number of roadways, that creates what are called heat sinks. It literally changes your climate. That's why Houston is terrible, okay? That's why it's so hot. Sorry, love you, H-Town. Love you, family. Anyway, but yeah, so the hotter it gets, the more you really do need that distance away from the ground because, again, the soils that are there are just absorbing this radiant heat. And you could get into reflection and deflection and all of that. We won't. But more concrete equals hotter temperatures. And so really, even if you don't have any other climatic changes, and you do, right? Even if you don't have any other climatic changes, our need for cooling technologies are increasing. Also because, again, it's expensive. ACs are expensive. You set it above like 75, and you're just going to be paying that bill. I don't know. Is there another question?
In the post-Civil War expansion era,
Mm-hmm.
did those settlers gain influence adopting adobe houses from like native groups like the Pueblo or people like that?
Yeah, that is a great question. So you are definitely going to see some, I'm going to say cultural and architectural synergism, just to sound fancy. But you are going to see the Spanish, for example. Now, they're originally adopting this really from Islamic, from Moorish peoples. So it goes back even further than indigenous Americans. But, you know, you refine things as you come to new regions and face new climatic conditions. And so, yeah, they're going to interact with other groups, Pueblo peoples, for example, and they will, we'll say borrow, we're going to say borrow things, mimic things that are working because, guys, many humans just in general, we're just kind of lazy. Or you can call it pragmatism. Like, eventually we figure out it's easier to take what is working and go with it than just to completely remake the system. And so that's a great question, and I answered it way too long. Yes. Yes, they did. Yeah. It's fine.
Do you, on average, see an increase in the size of buildings as this technology progresses, like from the adobe and sods to bigger houses?
Ooh, that is a great question. Can you go forward one slide, please? You're going to hate me for doing this.
Sorry.
No, you're not. That didn't move. No, wrong way. A telemarketer is calling me. I have this up here to keep the time. Yes, just because I like the joy here and I like the questions. So this is my joyous response to you. It has nothing to do with what you said. Sorry. And the answer is yes, but no. And but. Because you're going to see in some areas, for example, the adobe homes get pretty big. You're going to see like early 20th century, and there's a lot of reasons for that I'm not going to try to explain. You're going to see in some areas, though, like you're going to see some multi-level adobe homes, which is not generally something you see because structural stability, for example. You're going to see in the Central Plains, again, status here that, you know, railroads going to allow them to truck in, essentially, all the wood they want, no matter its natural absence. And you are going to see some people building bigger, finer homes than they otherwise would. But there's also not that I've seen, and my list is only at 1,200. It could get way bigger until I stop myself. I've not seen a direct correlation that holds true enough for me to say a definite yes. Because what you also see is that these plug-in units initially, they don't actually work all that well. They really only kind of cool the room. And even centralized air conditioning, as I said, sometimes it cools things, but at the expense of the humidity. And you're like, do I even want this on? It's like I'm in Houston. I'm like swimming through my living room. And so they don't always work well enough that people want to go out there and compensate, or sometimes they spend all their money on the AC units. And they really don't have the capital. So sometimes you see, yes, Galveston has some amazingly big homes that they're going to build around this time that they're going to incorporate different technologies to cool, fans and ceiling fans and electric fans and just other realizations about, oh, if we build it like this, we can catch the breezes better. But then also sometimes it's like tiny little home, but it's perfectly cooled. I mean, it is just perfect. So that didn't answer your question. As much as I can.
So, do you think if the air conditioning was never invented, that people would just keep living towards the coastline area to try to get some sort of breeze?
Yeah, so I appreciate when the history majors ask me questions about ahistorical topics that I can't answer incorrectly. Like, there's no wrong answer here. I'm being serious, Ben, thank you. Although I've liked all of the questions. I'm not shading anyone. So definitely, and many of you know this from 1302 classes, right? The advent of air conditioning makes life in the Sun Belt possible. Like, you just don't have Florida the way you have it without air conditioning. In fact, I don't remember which city it is. It might be Gatesville or Jacksonville. I could be totally wrong, so do not write that down. Michael's back here. Dr. Powers is like, listening. But there is a city with a statue of, I think it's Willis Carrier. But there's a city with a statue of an air conditioning dude. Like,
One in the Capitol building, one of the two statues from Florida is a guy who invented air conditioning.
Willis Carrier, right? Yeah, see? I knew what I was talking about. I just didn't remember what city it was in, which is terrible. I mean, you got to be in love with air conditioning to put up a statue of a dude who invented air conditioning, because I don't think he was even from that area. And so definitely it makes that shift from the Rust Belt down to these climes possible. And so if you don't have air conditioning, I still think you would have seen a demographic shift, because it's not air conditioning alone that pushes people, right? You've got pull factors as well. You've got economic pressures after the war. But like, maybe it's more concentrated along the coastlines. Definitely, I think you see different construction materials, because there's no way you have like these modern, rapid, you can buy your house in a Sears catalog type of Levittown construction going on without that technological intervention in your back pocket. So my answer is, again, apparently I don't like hard answers here. My answer is, again, kind of yes and no. You definitely would not have seen the demographic, geographic distribution that we have today. That is just not possible. I mean, look at us. The temperature goes up to 95 and we're like, Sorry, that was my, I'm hot sound. And it's mic, so they're back there going, Is there another hand? Yeah. All right, that is a great question, and never. Dun, da, da, da. So you still have areas today where air conditioning is still not the norm, even in residential spaces. I have a brother and sister-in-law who are in New York, and they're in New York, so New York is just its own beast. They're in New York City, and they still don't have air conditioning. And they have friends who have new construction. It's not like it's a 100-year-old home. You kind of understand that. This is new construction, and there's not air conditioning. And at least once a year, they're like, why don't we have this? So you still don't fully have it. But I would say by the 70s, most homes across the nation, at least more are built with air conditioning by the 70s than are built without it in terms of a national pattern. Certainly that's true in the Sun Belt. If you're looking at these hot summer states, that's not actually what I was trying to say, but hot summer works, or hot southern states, states like Texas, Florida, Louisiana, Arizona, you are going to see those Sun Belt states by the 60s and 70s. It is very unusual to see new construction without air conditioning. And if you tried to do something like that today in San Angelo, I don't know, it's probably against the law or something. I don't think it actually is. But remember too that you are also still going to have, I only kind of dipped my toe into this, but even today air conditioning is astronomically expensive. Our air conditioner broke a couple years ago, and it was almost $10,000 to buy a new one, and I just about vomited. I probably did. I mean, it is so expensive still, and really the cost has gone down relative to inflation if you look at just how amazingly expensive it was when it was first coming out as a technology. The relative cost has decreased since the 50s as they have refined things, as they have improved processes, as they have increased production. And so You also in the 50s and 60s, again, have a lot of people who are like, I would sure love that, but I can't buy it. Also, and this is not a great look for Texas, but in the 50s, you also have a lot of homes, a lot of entire areas that aren't even electrified yet, which is surprising because that whole like New Deal thing, rural electrification in the 30s, that brings electricity to a lot of areas in Texas, but not all. So you actually have a surprising number of areas in Texas that in the 50s, they couldn't like hook up an AC unit if they wanted to because they're not on the juice. I mean like the electric juice, the proper kind of juice. AJ, did I see a hand? Okay.
So back before modern air conditioning,
Yeah.
especially in like, say, West Texas,
Yeah.
it's hot dry wind.
Yes.
If you use hot dry wind to ventilate your home, like, what do? You just keep your doors and windows shut and hope it doesn't get too hot? Or you just suck it up and take the hot dry wind?
Yeah, that is a great question. Now, my preference is you give me the hot, dry wind any day of the week over Houston's hot, humid. I go home now and I'm like, I'm a pansy. But pansies are pretty, okay? But I go home and I'm like, I can't do this. It is humid and I'm gross. So I prefer the hot, dry, but you're right. It's still hot. I mean, you walk outside sometimes, even today, we were walking over and like, it's a little warm for October. I mean, cold front or no. And so what you're going to see is that most people are going to combine multiple passive measures. You're going to find awnings on adobe buildings. And like when you say that out loud, you're like, that doesn't make sense. But you are. Now, not every adobe building, but you're going to sometimes find awnings on adobe buildings to help cool the air that's coming through the windows. Because remember, the construction materials of adobe homes help ensure that the radiant heat isn't absorbed too much. It helps keep the interior cool, but if you're basically blowing hot air through those windows, that's going to undo the benefits of the earth and materials somewhat. And so you're going to see a lot of porches on adobe homes, for example. You sometimes see awnings. Also, we didn't talk about it, but do y'all know what a shade tree is? If you're a farmer, you know what they are, or if you grew up on a farm or something. Shade trees, they're used on farms. They're used in residential areas. Not in Levittown. We pull up all the trees when we're building them. In our new construction, we raise everything, and then we have to go plant saplings. And you're like, can you just save this tree over here? Anyway, shade trees, I'm a tree hugger. A little bit. I'm crunchy, a little bit. Shade trees are the big honking trees that you put not too close to the house, because you don't want it falling on your house, but close enough to the house that it literally offers shade. And so you're going to see heavy use. And again, this is most applicable and most effective when you can support trees in large numbers, so East Central Texas. But even in El Paso, even in Lubbock, even along the border, you're going to see people planting shade trees, even if it's mesquite. Now, mesquite's not a great shade tree because the leaves are like this big. But they're going to plant these shade trees around their homes because that offers a way to arbitrarily and sort of naturally but unnaturally decrease the temperature of the air that's coming in through those windows. In fact, I got a great story of a lady. She grew up somewhere in West Texas. I don't remember where. And she described how they used to just go sleep under the trees. Not under the stars, not on the sleeping porches, which is common. You take your porch and you screen it in so you can sleep outside. She would just go sleep in the trees. Not in the trees, sorry. Under the trees. Because that offered the best sort of temperature, ambient temperature. Yeah, good question. Other questions? Yeah, there's no limit. You're good.
Okay. On average, what construction materials would you say with the size or the other construction types? Which one would you say are the most resilient? Because I've been with family driving through the plains, and you'll still see ruins of soddings and sod homes.
Yeah, for sure. If you're talking pure resiliency, then it's probably the concrete. And those concrete homes are often like bunkers. They're not often usually built to be Cold War bunkers, but they feel like this is a Cold War bunker. And so it's probably the concrete. But it really depends. A lot of the stone houses, there is a particular, my German is terrible, which is honestly why I took this out of the lecture. But there's a style of home you found especially in Fredericksburg, but anywhere where you saw heavy German and sometimes Czech settlements, like for something. And it's basically this sort of half technique of using a lot of stone, having Sunday homes with sort of these half levels, and I'm grossly simplifying. And those homes tended to be pretty resilient as well because it's stone, right? The problem with Saudis is over time you do see a lot of stability. Extreme weather, I don't know if you know this, but Saudis don't necessarily stand up well to like tornadic events. Same with dugouts, although dugouts is better because you're literally digging into, so they tend to be more secure. Adobe and earthen homes, again, they can be pretty stable. We have some adobe homes in San Antonio that date back to like the mid 1700s, basically the earliest period of Spanish occupation. You only have like 2 or 3 now, but you have a couple of adobe homes in San Antonio, or missions, a couple of the missions as well, that they date all the way back to that initial period of settlement by, you know, San Antonio de Bejar and the Presidio and the priests and all that. But again, adobe, it's pretty resilient, which is why it's still in use, one reason why it's in use. But again, like if you're building anywhere where there's going to be a lot of rain, that is going to lead to cracks. And you've probably seen adobe homes or even stucco, although sometimes those cracks are fake. And it's like meant to mimic the cracks in adobe homes. Have y'all seen the fake cracks in the stucco homes? No judgment if that's your house. But anyway, you'll see the cracks in the adobe because again, that clay, and it depends on how much clay you're putting in there. Like different soils have different clay contents, and I'm not going to bore you with all the soil details, but depending on how much clay you have in there, is it 10%, is it 20%, is it silty, that can really change the stability. Also like straw versus dung, you can use dung as well, dung bricks. They don't smell once they're dry. They smell before they're dried. But if it has a lot of rain, it's gonna shrink and swell. And even if it only shrinks and swells a little bit, cumulatively that can do a lot of damage. So probably concrete or stone. The wood frames, I mean, how often do you see like historic log cabins that are actually legitimately the original cabin? Those don't hold up well either. Log homes are just a fancy log cabin, by the way. Usually they've planed the boards or the ends or something, or notched it. Sometimes you're notching the cabins too. So wood frames are not usually as great. I would say, I could stop and shut up, but I'm not. That for an answer here, you could look to Galveston, for example, and see what types of houses weathered the storms. Shotgun homes didn't. The masonry, stone, and concrete houses did. That's not the only pressure on homes, but that gives you an idea of what's going to happen to some of these styles of homes in the face of torrential rainfall, in the face of strong winds, climactic events. So also if you're up in Tornado Alley, for example, the strong winds in the face of those Saudis, because you don't see too many Saudis. You're like, oh, it's a hunk of grass. And there's a marker next to it, and you're like, I'm imagining what this used to look like. And I don't really mean that in a cruel way. I just mean it's earthen. So there's going to be sometimes limitations, but that doesn't mean it's a bad material. It means that there's a give and take here, and it's great for what it does in certain situations. And what you often saw is that the Saudi or the dugout was house one, while they built the real house out of wood, out of, that they had to pay. So that was a huge status symbol in West Texas to have a wood house in the late 1800s, because you have to pay to truck it in. But whether it's out of stone or out of wood, and then they turned the sod house, the dog trot, or the dugout into their barn or something like that. So you see a lot of sod barns, or what used to be. This was a sod barn. And you see a lot of dog trot barns, and you see dugouts don't work as well, but you'll sometimes see this dugout that is now a school used to be the home of XYZ. Yeah. Other questions? See, I like questions, remember? We're good? Okay, thank you for putting up with me. Thank you for coming. And yes, thank you. Disappear backwards off the stage. I don't know what to do. This is really awkward. I don't want to turn my back to you. Yes, but then I feel like a pageant queen and I will fall. I do not trust myself.